Hello and welcome to Paradigm Playbook, a podcast for entrepreneurs in the business of sports. Your hosts, Dave Kozak and Steve Cook, are business owners, successful entrepreneurs, sports enthusiasts, avid readers, and longtime friends. For years, they've read every business book on the market and built successful companies with what they've learned. This podcast will give you the critical takeaways in just 15 minutes a week. It's a quick and easy playbook for building a winning sports business. And now, here are your hosts, Dave and Steve.
Paradigm Playbook offers business, reset, and expansion expertise. Visit ParadigmPlaybook.com to see how we can assist you. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Paradigm Playbook. I'm your host, Dave Kozak, alongside my co-host, Mr. Steve Cook.
Locked and ready to go, buddy.
You're on it, huh?
Let's go.
What's the subject today, Steve?
We're talking about transparency in management. You know, we started digging into it a little bit last week, and we thought it was going to, kind of bleed too long. So I think, I guess the beginning, a good place to start with transparency is where are you transparent? Whether you're transparent in your decision making, in your hiring, in your finances, in your operations, like which of those is, which is an always, which is a sometimes, and which is a never.
Yeah, and I think that's it's got to be a little bit variable based on the business. But I think you have to really calculate who you're transparent to financially. Mm-hmm. I think that's one that has to be guarded. And I'm not saying you don't have transparency there. I just think you have to think about it as to whether it benefits anyone. I think transparency in the goals, how you establish them, how you got
I think
them.
That's how we started last week. It's like sometimes we have these goals in our head as owners, managers, and it's not getting to the next level, let alone the next level.
Yeah, and I think there's a culture that is created with transparent leadership, right? And I'm always reminded of stories that my dad shared with me, and he was a corporate attorney, as I've talked about before. He worked for a large chemical corporation, and it got bought by another chemical corporation, and it got bought again eventually. But the one transition he was talking about, there was a 2-page chain of command, meaning for a massive chemical company, that's a pretty tight chain of command, right? Basically, fully authorizing its people that it hired, recruited, and taught to make decisions for the company, for the betterment of the company. So like a transparent, like, hey, you've got the goods, Steve, go do it. When they got bought, it went from a 2-page chain of command to a 48-page chain of command, and no decisions were able to be made. And it basically just stalled everything. So I think there's transparency on multiple levels, right? You have the transparency of like the health of the company. You have the transparency of enabling people, right? I think transparency creates the opportunity to enable someone to do more, right? So if you're clear with them, transparent about the goals and the positives and negatives and desired outcomes, then they too will be clear and transparent down the line, right?
I think I'm going back to a small business entrepreneur, sports world, like in my world at Grand Slam. So a transparency on the financial side of it. And I think there's part of it that it's important that you are transparent. And then that's on the gross revenue side on, are you hitting your goals, and whether your goals are attendance goals or, gross revenue goals or whatever they are. I think that's important. When it gets to transparency financially on who makes how much and where the salaries are going, that's where, you kind of draw the line. So I think sometimes you need to create separate reports that you can share with your people, because if you want them to buy into the growth of the company, they have to have a starting point. They have to know where they are. And if your targeted gross revenues are at 90% of where you want them, and you've got an urgency and they don't, then that's due to a lack of communication and transparency about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what that's sort of exactly what I was alluding to. And you said it far better than I in the financial transparency, right? I think in the retail space, right, which most of these small sports businesses are retail shops at the end of the day, the pricing transparency needs to be there. I think you need to tell people why your price is what it is. That type of transparency leads people to a level of trust, right? If you know I sell a widget and I make a 95% profit, how do you feel about that, Steve?
Yeah, you're putting it all in your pocket.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of the conclusion that somebody would draw.
Absolutely. And if an employee is working and knows that you make 95% profit, how's that employee feel about your business? You could pay me more, right? So I think transparency and establishing what you believe profitability should be, right? Are you aiming for a 20% profitability margin? What are you aiming for, and how do you explain it? For us, I've always tried to target 25% profitability. That gives me money in the bank to hire more people, to expand the company, to do the operation. But I'm clear about that, right? That 25% profitability doesn't end up in my pocket. It ends up reinvested in the organization. And so there's ways to talk about money that are positive, but there's also ways where if you're not transparent and you give a little bit of information, it can trickle. The whisper down the lane effect can have a negative consequence at the customer level as well.
One of the things that we see, I'm consulting with 2 clients right now, and we're putting together financials. And so we target gross profit before we take out all the fixed costs. So, and then comparing from revenue stream to revenue stream, or program to program. So if we're going from your elite program, your top level athletes, where your ratios of coach to athlete is different, the space needed, they're bigger kids, so you're putting more into that. So we transition from, a 40% gross profit to a 75% gross profit. And in most of the business, the smaller they are, the higher the profit. I mean, it's not meant that way, but that's how it turns out, because you get more kids in there, you get more kids in a group. The coaches are usually paid a little bit less. It doesn't take the amount of expensive equipment. There's a lot of things. So there, we're just tracking everything that is specific to that program and coming up with a gross revenue. Then after that, they all have to, take a piece of the common costs, which is, rent, insurance, and all that. One of the things that I guarantee that the coaches aren't thinking right now, anybody that's on a recurring relocking interest rate on a building that they're buying or whatever, went through some interesting times the last 2 years. And this year specifically, we just went through it, where interest rates, all of a sudden are jumping by 2 points. You go from a 5% mortgage to a 7.5% right now. And will it come down? But those lenders that are at 7.5 now, they're trying to lock you for 5 years. So, and that's one of the reasons people say, well, you raised your rates. Well, yeah, it's more expensive to run the business right now. And the one thing that shouldn't suffer, and everybody's got to understand this, you're in this to make money. The one thing that shouldn't suffer is that profit line.
And I think, I want to get back to transparency. I think next episode we should go into profit. And what is...
Okay, yeah, we can dig deeper into that. I was just saying that's one of the things that you have to be a little bit transparent about.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't expect people to know things that you're not explaining.
Well, and there is probably the mic drop of the episode, right? You cannot expect people to understand things you are not explaining. And that is, in my opinion, the biggest and most crucial transparency you can have in a company, right? I had when I started my career, I had hired 3 people, and I assumed that they would follow my lead, right? I was leading by example, and I was doing all of the things that I was asking them to do, and I was doing it every day next to them. And turns out they didn't just follow my example, right? They didn't know why I did A, B, and C. They saw A and did A, then they did C, but they didn't do B, and they missed out because I didn't explain to them the purpose of B. I didn't tell them, hey, make sure if you get this widget here, it goes over here so that the next person can move it over there, right? And so you think about it, and you could you say I hired the wrong people? Maybe, but if you have a process or you have a business model, you need to explain how it's done, why it's done that way, and give people the, I guess, the respect of explaining it out so that they don't, it's not now, so that they don't, let me finish that thought, so that they don't necessarily do it differently. At the same time, I think as a leader in transparency, you have to give them the opportunity to improve what it is, right? So if they see it as an issue, they then have a responsibility to help you make it better or improve that process.
I think what you said all ties back to what you said earlier about establishing a culture for communication that's there. So you're not answering questions that aren't asked because people don't ask them because they don't feel comfortable asking them. So that is a culture that maybe you haven't created accurately or open enough. So I think one of the things about transparency is to set yourself up as approachable. And, this is interesting because coming from a corporate corporate business.
Nailed it.
So you get locked in these things. And one of the things that always irritated me corporately, those that are listening that know where I came from, don't repeat this. This is a secret. But everybody in that organization scheduled 1 hour meetings.
Yeah.
And so I'd say, listen, I need to talk to you. I need 10 minutes. And they'd say, okay, I have 10 minutes next Wednesday at 4:00. It's like something crazy. I said, wait a second, 10 minutes. All I need is 10 minutes. But they're scheduled so tight. So part of being approachable is scheduling blanks in your schedule. So, if someone does send you an email, you can say, oh, you know what? I'm tied up till noon. I'll give you a quick call back then. Or, I'll catch you in the hallway. I'll catch you at the water cooler, whatever. But you have to make yourself approachable and available, which I understand, especially in a position like yours. You're trying to run 4 different companies. And all of a sudden, not only can't you fit in small things, you can't even fit in the meetings that you need to have. So there comes a point where you have to relook at the scheduling. Owners of small businesses schedule their employees where they're taking a class every hour on the hour. They have a 10-minute break, and that's when they're touching hands with the parents and customers, but they're not giving them the time. So it becomes a scheduling issue for both your employees and yourself to make everything approachable. So you do open up this open communication.
Yeah, you had listed out a couple places you were asking about transparency. What were they again? First was the financial. What were the other different categories that you laid out there?
Well, HR is one. Who's coming, who's going. Another is the growth or change or expectations in the company. I think it has to be real clear. If everybody's saying, well, if we do as good as last year, that's good. And you're saying, no, I have a forecast of us increasing by 20%. I went to my stakeholders. This is what I'm promising, and they don't know it. So it's forecasting. I think maybe that's still part of financial.
Yeah. I think forecasting, budgeting, and that's all in that financial component. The transparency among, you said HR, which I think is a broad subject matter. But when we let someone go or somebody quits, we sort of send out the announcement, right? If the environment is negative around it, you're transparent to an extent, right? You got to watch HIPAA violations and things like that, and all the other government interference stuff in there. But I think being transparent is a cultural thing to me. Like, I keep coming back to that culture piece.
And I think you're talking about is, how far do you go with honesty? And, and there are legal ramifications and things you have to watch. In small business, we have a little bit less of that.
Yep.
But to be honest with the people that are still there, it's important they know why someone left. And, it's typical to say they just want to fit with our organization. Well, why not? Let's dig into that. Let's be transparent. You know what? They were here on time, but when they came in, they weren't prepared to start their lesson. When they came in, they weren't ready to go to work. They then needed a coffee break. And you know what? There's all these things that are in there that I think it's important that everybody knows that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can say, oh, you know what? Maybe I'm on thin ice. It's like I do a little bit of that too. But I think honesty to a point. The other thing that I think is a mistake with companies, when things start spinning, and in our world, when you're in an industry, I was in the gymnastics equipment business industry, and when things were happening, I pretty much knew it.
Mm-hmm.
So when people try, I'm going to hold off till I get all the information. No, tell me you're talking to this. Tell me this purchase is taking. I know what's going on. Everybody's talking. So it's better if they hear it from the boss saying, listen, we're talking about an acquisition, or we're talking about a sale. We're talking about adding a new product line. We're talking about these things. I can't give you the details of it right now. Just want you to know you're important to me. As soon as I can release this, you got it. So I think honesty and openness, as far as you can go, is better than holding it all, close to your vest and kind of keeping things in the dark. What's the old mushroom thing?
We appreciate your feedback. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review. If not, we'd still love to hear from you so we can improve.
Yeah. So that's interesting too, because I've been through a bunch of M&As over the course of my career, and sometimes you have that non-disclosure agreement or that secrecy agreement that's struck, and they're always struck in a way that you can consult with your most important advisors or stakeholders, as you put it, in that arena. But I think there's also a component to it too that you've got to bring to your staff, your employees, and say, hey, we're getting into something. I can't give you a lot of details right now. It's a great opportunity. There's something positive on the horizon here. When I can say more, I will say more. Just know that we're planning something, or we're working on a deal, or we're working on something, right?
Yeah, and if you handle that in a different way, or say, I can't talk about that now.
Yeah.
Then you're handling it the wrong way. Now you've just reduced the level of that person. And how many of us said, yeah, I'm on a need to know basis. And we mean that in a very negative sense. It's like, they ain't telling me shit. It's like,
yeah.
So I do think you're right. You have to be open as far as you can go with that. So
I have another one that I think is important that pops into my head about transparency and honesty and sort of that whole cultural thing we're discussing. Mistakes happen every single day. They're real, and they're real at the highest level. And one of the things that I've done in my companies is when I make a mistake, I make an announcement, right? Mm-hmm. I address it at a sales meeting, or I talk about the scenario where I screwed up, because if you screw up and you try and hide it, you're not doing anything for yourself. You're not doing anything for the betterment of the organization, and you're going to make that same mistake again, right? So to me, one of the things that I believe transparent leadership does is when transparent leadership makes a bad decision or doesn't follow through on a whatever it is, you admit it. There may be an explanation. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it's not an excuse. Hopefully it's just an explanation. And a lot of times I think people get those two things wrong too. Excuse versus explanation. right? Sometimes you are explaining something that occurred. Sometimes it is a pure excuse. And I think those have to be detailed. But if you're creating a good, transparent culture, you're giving people enough bandwidth to make mistakes, learn from them, and continue to grow. I know there's a lot of people that will make a mistake and do everything in their power to immediately try and cover it up and not necessarily fix it.
Well, or even, blame it on outside conditions. I'll give you an example of a big mistake that I made at Grand Slam. I don't know if you remember, but there was a point.
Oh, I remember.
You remember them all? I'm only talking about one here. We're not going into, but so we had decided skateboarding was getting real popular, and we decided we're going to add a skate park. We had the acreage in the back. We had plenty of places to go. I bought the best equipment, invested quite a bit of money in it, got it all set up. It was starting to pick up some momentum, and then it died off. Well, what happened is 2 local municipalities opened up skate parks that were free.
Yeah.
And so there's 2 explanations. One is that the market conditions changed and I wasn't able to profit on mine. 2 is I didn't do adequate research to know what the market was doing.
Yeah.
It couldn't have happened that fast. That was on me. That was, as they say in baseball, my bad.
Yeah.
Right. So that was my mistake. And I think you lose respect when you take every mistake that you make and it's something else or someone else's fault.
Yeah, you lose your ability to be an actual leader.
Yeah.
Like leaders don't make excuses.
And
leaders fail and they own their failure and they move forward.
And if you think that the people working for you aren't smart enough to figure out when you made a mistake, one of 2 things: either you hired stupid people, or you're not the brightest bulb. So one of the 2.
Yeah, or you think you're that manipulative or that creative.
You're going to buy that. Yeah.
And it's not going to happen. And so, I can talk about a different type of mistake. I made a mistake when I fired somebody one time in firing that person. Retrospectively, I was sort of in this frame of mind that you're either all in with us or you're out. And so you're either rowing in the same direction or you're out of the company, right? And I had someone who was questioning some of the planning that we were doing, couldn't wrap his head around it, couldn't convince others of it, but did a different piece of the business very well. It was fantastic. And I took it as that person's never going to be bought into what we're doing. That person needs to go because that's a cancer and you cut it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the biggest mistakes I made because all this person was really asking was, let me just do what I do and let me cut my hours so I won't be full time because I don't think I get all this. Let me be part time and do what I do very well. And I was like, no, you're out. And it took me 18 months to train new people up to that role that he had done very well. And so and that was a huge growth moment for me 8 years ago.
I'll give you an example of a time when I handled things properly and I gave the correct explanation. I had a very good salesperson working for me in the corporate setting. They came to me one day and said that they were resigning, they were leaving. They weren't comfortable with where they were living. They had family back west, and they had been hired before I came in and been promised that eventually they would be transferred to a West Coast office. But they were leaving for that reason. And it made the rest of the team very upset. They felt like this person was bailing on them. My mindset, and I sat them all down, I said, if there's any time we should accept this person is making a decision that is family-based. If we can't understand that, then there's something wrong with us. He's making the right decision. I wish him well. I hope you do very well. 2 years later, the person on the West Coast that wasn't as good resigned. And I went back to this person and said, okay, you want to come back? And when I did bring him back, he was accepted right in. And everybody, he's a leader on that team right now. I'm sure he's listening now, but he fit right in. But I took the time to explain it so everybody understand it. And he came back and everybody's accepted him.
Yeah. And again, you talk about transparency. Yeah. There it is. And here's another thing. And this may be a whole different podcast because we're sort of winding down here, but perspective is huge. And transparency and perspective combined are very powerful. A lot of times I'll turn to even Niall. I'm like, Niall, think about it from a different lens. Like put yourself in from a different perspective. Like take a look at this over here from someone else's shoes, right? That'll walk a mile in their shoes and you'll understand. Sometimes we get so focused in from our perspective that we fail to step out. And if you, in that case, all you did was bring a different perspective on a decision.
Yeah, and if I had let everybody go on thinking,
fester,
and I probably would have still brought them back, but it would have been a harder sell. This case, when I did bring them back, it wasn't a hard sell at all. And we have,
as a matter of fact, if you think about that you turned it from this negative bailout on us to respecting a person for making a personal decision for the right reasons. Yeah. And that's an instant flip in someone's brain.
The one of the things that happens in the sports business is you get one person who's coaching 20 hours a week and one that is only coaching 10. And the 20-hour-a-week person starts resenting the person that's only there 10. Now they're being paid hourly, so it's really fair. And what I've always said is when I'm looking for coaches, and we have a variety of coaches that we hire, that I want the number of hours that you can give me with full in. So if you can do 4 hours, okay, let's see if I can find a spot for you for 4 hours. Those of us that are in the sports entrepreneur, small business thing, we can do that. We can hire people that work 4 hours because it's usually a part-time position. So we have a lot of teachers that are working full-time teaching, or they can't do lessons during a season where they're coaching a school team or whatever. But I think being open about what you want when you're hiring keeps everybody on the same, same playing field.
Yeah, there's a transparency that we didn't hit on, and we'll call this the last one. We talked about transparent when people leave. We didn't talk about transparent when people enter.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge deal because animosity can start right away. Let's say, for instance, I were to hire someone that was coming right in as a manager in our company. Mm-hmm. Well, what about the person who thinks they should have gotten that position? And you never even said it was an open position. You never even said you were hiring for it, right? You basically just said, this person's coming on board. Well, what does that do to the rank and file below that person at that point to say, well, I'm never going to get a shot at that. That's never going to be there. So I think 2 pieces of transparency. If you are looking to hire, is there anyone in your shop that you would recommend for that? And do you disclose that hire? And then secondarily, if you are going to bring someone else in, have a meeting before that about what the why of this person, so that you're transferring your own leadership influence to whoever you are bringing in at that point, right? That transfer of influence is huge. But if I just bring someone in and say, hey, this is their role, and I don't tell everybody else how I see it, it'll cause problems.
I think so. Yeah, good point. We could take a while on this, but transparency and open discussion about people moving in all roles. And, if there's an inclination in your head, or even if there isn't, that this person may think they're ready for that, but you don't think they are, that still has a discussion that you want to have. Say, listen, I'm thinking about hiring a person to bring in there. I know this is something that maybe you aspire to. My opinion, you're not quite ready for that. That doesn't mean you never will be. And that position is going to open up again. Everybody's got to be able to look forward and see something. But if you as the owner are not communicating what you can do, and it happens in sports all, I'm already the head coach of the top team. What else can I do here?
Yeah.
Well, you can help teach the other coaches. You can be a trainer. You can outsource. You can be, part of our marketing team that goes out and speaks to the community. There are a ton of things you can do, but if you're not doing this and suggesting it, then, why should they ever think that opportunity is ever going to come to them? So I think encouraging healthy discussions between you and I and amongst themselves is good. Let them talk. I've often said, one of the things I confess to in all my talks is that I'm a recreational debater, and I enjoy those discussions. Not everybody does, but that is fun for me. But the more you can encourage a back and forth to get all opinions on the table, the more transparency your overall organization is.
Yeah. Last point I'll make, just piggybacking on what you said, that person that was the best coach, right? Then in their mind, there is a need in business for those people to turn around and teach those that are less experienced or younger. However, there is a patience they may not have and an expectation that you may not have given that is a role for them. That is one of the most critical and transparent conversations that needs to happen. You've gotten to the level. I agree. However, I need these 5 people to get to the level. You're not a one-man band, so we need to use you to train some of these people up. And whether it's, put a camera on that person and record how they do it and use video, or that person actually becomes the trainer, you've got to balance that stuff, because some people, just because they can doesn't mean they can teach others how to do it the way they do it. But it's certainly a conversation.
So this really will be the last one on transparency. So transparency in what your purpose is in what you're doing. Everybody's heard me talk about, getting the kids to the big field and all that. If I'm not transparent about my why, my purpose, my mission, my vision, then we've got another issue. So this should have been a 2-hour podcast. That's all I'm saying.
We can,
and I'm being very transparent about that.
Perfect. We can certainly go into that. We'll do. I think profit's a good conversation where we can sort of play back and forth on for next time. But yeah, hopefully you guys learned something. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please like and share our stuff. And stay tuned for the next episode of Paradigm Playbook.
We also have Playmaker episodes coming up, doing another interview today. So check the website. You'll see Playmaker interviews coming out. Thanks, everybody. Make it a great day.
Are you ready to learn and discover new ideas? We want to hear from you. Share your questions, thoughts, and ideas for the Paradigm Playbook podcast. We value your input and want to create episodes that match your interests. Leave a comment or send us an email at playbook@paradigmplaybook.com.